So the recording just started, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and you being here on the line. We are Students Supporting Israel, a student organization that started at the University of Minnesota in 2012, who operates on the over 50 college campuses in the United States and Canada. Now, our mission is to be a clear and confident pro-Israel voice and to support students in grassroots activism. We just finished the academic year, and over the summer, of course, we're doing webinars to keep educating our students and our community. And at this opportunity, I would like to introduce our guest, Yifa Segal, all the way from Israel, that joined us at a late hour. And a quick introduction about Yifa. She's the founder and executive director of the International Legal Forum, the ILF, a cutting-edge international legal arm fighting against terror, anti-Semitism, and delegitimization of the State of Israel, which is an international legal. Let me a quick introduction about Yifa. The founder and executive director of the International Legal Forum, the ILF, a cutting-edge international legal arm fighting against terror, anti-Semitism, and delegitimization of the State of Israel. About Yifa, the founder and executive. Can everyone hear well? I apologize for that. And so I'll continue with the introduction. The Legal Forum is a network of Yifa is the joint director of other organizations as well, like the Key Press Service, which is the only Israeli news agency covering news and reports of footage in real time for media outlets in Israel. And Ms. Yifa also has an BA in law from the University of Haifa and an MA of International Relations from the University of Tel Aviv. And also a member of Shurat Adin from Israel. So Yifa, thank you so much for joining us, and the stage is yours, and we're excited to have you here with us.
Okay, well, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Ilan and SSI, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for, well, I think this is a very timely topic. Well, actually, I think it has been timely for over 50 years, but I think the discussion about the possibility of applying Israeli law to the territories coming July 1st has made it, you know, even more important, even more crucial than ever to properly familiarize ourselves with the legal issues. And so before we dive in, I just want to make, you know, two important comments. First of all, this is not about politics. I don't know, you know, each and every one of us has, you know, his or her right to, you know, our own views regarding security issues, diplomatic issues, different concerns, different ideas of when, how, what to do with these territories. There are, of course, other very, very important questions that, you know, derive the very complex reality that we have in Israel and with the Palestinians in recent decades. This only the intention of this briefing is only to discuss the legal and historical facts, to review the region and to understand the context of what everyone has been talking about for so many years. Just to give you like a teaser, a small example, I mean, I've heard the expression an illegal occupation you know, more times than I can count. So this might come as a shock to some of you, but in international law, there is not such a thing as an illegal occupation. It's not a legal phrase. It's you know, just simply putting it, it's not a thing. You cannot, according to international law, you cannot illegally occupy anything. I mean, international law does refer to situations where you are, you know, in a belligerent occupation, and this is not a territory that belongs to you as a state, but it does not, and of course it comes to regulate human rights and other issues, but there is no such thing as an illegal occupation. And even though there is no such thing, you keep on hearing it time and time again, wherever you go. And so just kind of put things into context of how sometimes the issue of international law has been weaponized. And I think Israel has been an easy target for many, many, many years. So just kind of to get the ball rolling. And what I intend to do now is kind of go over with you first a little bit of history, going back something like 100 years, and understanding how the development of the region, starting with the World War I, Balfour Declaration, the San Remo Resolution, and other facts in history. And then we're just going to talk about a few developments in international law that can certainly influence the position of Israel's rights to the territories. All right, so let's get started. I've put in two maps. First of all, I really like maps. I think it really does help to kind of understand and get the idea of what's going on. And so I just thought it was interesting that, if you randomly search for a map of Israel, then you can easily find one that says West Bank and another one that says Judea and Samaria. And of course, it does refer to the same territory. It just depends on who's the person who prepared the maps. But just to get a sense, this is Israel today. What you see here, can you see my marker, Ilan? I hope so. Anyway, there's the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, as we can see here. Of course, Jerusalem is about in the middle here, more or less. To the south and southwest, we have Egypt. To the east, we have Jordan. Down below, we have Saudi Arabia. Northeast Syria, North Lebanon, and of course going on, there's Iraq and other countries as well. All right, Ilan is telling me you do see my markers, so that's good. Okay, so let's begin with the mandate for Palestine. All right, so why do I want to start with the mandate for Palestine? Because this area, this huge area here, the entire Middle East more or less, was conquered for over 400 years by the Ottoman Empire, by the Turks. And so every single person that has lived under this vast, enormous region that was under the Ottoman territory was basically a citizen of the Ottoman Empire, and nothing more, nothing less. For many centuries, as we discussed. So come World War I, of course, this is before the mandate for Palestine, but this is the background. There's a huge world war, and as part of the world war, the Allied powers are also fighting the Ottoman Empire over many parts of the Middle East, and of course this region as well. And so as a part of the war against the Ottoman Empire, the British come here, as the French as well, but we'll leave that aside for a minute. The British come here and they try to kind of see how they would, divide this territory once they occupy it, once they conquer it, who they're going to ally with, what's in their favor, what's just, I don't know. But there's an understanding, or they begin to think of how they would divide this territory. And so let's start from the part here in blue. Okay, the Balfour Declaration, which was adopted on November 2nd, 1917, basically Lord Balfour, which was of course British, is making a statement that the British government views very favorably the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and they are recognizing the historical connection between the Jewish people and the land, and they wish to help reconstitute their national home here in the land of Israel/Palestine. This was the Balfour Declaration going back to 1917. Now, of course, 1917, this was an enormous success for the Zionist movement, for the Jewish community that resided here in the territory. And but that Balfour Declaration that I learned about in high school, I don't know about any of you, but this is something that we celebrate in Israel, and we know about the Balfour Declaration. But basically, this was not of any, let's say, legal. It didn't have any legal status at all. This was just a declaration. Of course, it was very, very valuable. When did it become something that does have a legally binding force in international law? It becomes that when a couple of years later, when World War I is over, of course, the Allied power wins over the Ottoman Empire and their allies, and there's a conference being held back then in San Remo, Italy. This says August, but in fact it's actually April, so I need to change that to April 1920. They meet and discuss how they will now, divide up all this new acquired land of theirs, and they come up with the system of the mandates. The mandates for Palestine was not the only one, okay? And during that April 2019 San Remo conference, they actually ratify, or basically put the language of the Balfour Declaration into a binding resolution in international law. So basically what we've said before, the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people and the reconstitution of a national home in Palestine, all of this beautiful language now becomes a binding part of international law. And I've put in another date, July 1922. This is when the League of Nations unanimously, and this is important, unanimously approved the mandate for Palestine, which included, again, this language. I also want to tell you that there was another part to this that said that the mandate will encourage aliyah, or basically Jewish immigration, back into their ancestral homeland, and that the Jews have the right, the inherent right, to settle in all parts of the mandate. Now, I want to show you this map. This is a very interesting map that a lot of people don't really understand. Now, look at this vast territory. Okay, I'm going to take you back a little bit to the first map. All right, look at this little map and compare it to this map. Okay, so this was the mandate for Palestine, which is basically the territory of what is today Israel, of course not including the Golan Heights. What is today Israel? The part here is what is now known as the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, okay? And all of this, too bad that this is a Zoom lecture, so I can't ask you, but all of this, I'll just tell you, is what is today Jordan, or the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So let's continue. Oh, I just want to make clear that there was another part of the mandate that said that nothing should be done which might prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. All right, oops, look at this. We went back to being a teeny tiny little Israel. And what happened, in a nutshell, when the British came here and tried to find allies before and during World War I, they've actually, they signed agreements. I wish I had more time. I would tell you all about these agreements and the Faisal-Weizmann agreements. But basically, they had some, they made promises to local tribes. One of the tribes was the Hashemite tribe. Now, the Hashemite tribe, if you look down here, further down southeast, closer to where today is Saudi Arabia in the Arab Peninsula area. And this clan, this tribe, the Hashemite tribe, was extremely helpful in combating against the Ottomans in those regions of the Middle East. And so the British made a promise to the Hashemites that once they will help them win World War I, they will then give them territory and give them, the ability to rule over their own territory. And eventually, I think, if you read the history books, then you'll learn that I think the British didn't really count on the Arabs making demands for the British to actually fulfill their promise. But of course they did, and they insisted upon this promise to be fulfilled. And eventually what the British decided to do was basically to carve out, okay, let's go back, carve out all this territory, which constitutes something like 70%, 77% of the entire territory of the mandate for Palestine. So 77% was given to the Hashemite, and created Transjordan, which we now know as Jordan, or the Hashemite Kingdom of Transjordan, or the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Why is it Transjordan? Because it's on the other side of the Jordan River. By the way, this is the Jordan River. I've taken many delegations on tours in Israel, and always when we cross over the Jordan River, people are shocked. They expect, the Jordan River is discussed so much. People expect to see, I don't know, something, and then, if you blink, you miss it. And people are like, where is the Jordan River? And then we just crossed it. But basically, it is a strategic point in this region, and this is the Jordan River, and this is the Transjordan. Okay, so even though, let's go back for a second. So even though under binding international, a binding resolution in international law, the entire thing was promised to the Jews to reconstitute their ancestral homeland. 77% was carved out of it and was given to the Hashemites. By the way, the Hashemites are approximately 15% of the population in Jordan. Today, probably less, because they have so many refugees that came from Syria during the civil war. So for many years, they were a very small minority that actually ruled over, the local population that are also referred to as Palestinians, because they are the people who were the residents of the Mandate for Palestine. And this is a very interesting political issue inside of Jordan. All right, so let's continue to November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly, the Partition Plan, what is known as the Partition Plan. So first thing that you must know is that every resolution, the UN Charter has established the power of the United Nations, unlike the League of Nations. The League of Nations took every resolution that was taken and adopted by the League of Nations became international law, was binding under international law. When they established the United Nations, the idea was a bit different. They wanted to learn from the lessons of the predecessor that failed, the League of Nations, and they thought, let's not just keep it as a small club of 51 countries. Let's make it into a bigger club, but we can't give these countries all that power. So they basically changed the way things work. The United Nations cannot take resolutions that are binding under international law. None of these resolutions are actually have any power in becoming law. The one exception is the United Nations Security Council. And even within the Security Council, only resolutions that are taken under the specific Article 7 are considered binding. Most resolutions, the vast majority of resolutions, are not taken under Article 7, but Article 6, therefore also not binding, do not make law. So the Partition Plan was a resolution taken by the General Assembly. So again, never mind what it says, it did not become law. So the only way that this resolution can become law is if it becomes a treaty, a contract that was between the parties, basically the Jewish population and the Arab population within what was left of the Mandate for Palestine. So the United Nations General Assembly comes up with this idea of a proposed plan, and then they take it to the parties, they take it to the Jewish leadership. The Jewish leadership says, yes, this might leave us with a very, very small portion of what we were promised, or our ancestral homeland, or the biblical land, or any type of a Zionist, bigger dream that they've had. But the reason behind it was we are better off having some independence, especially in the context of, just a couple of years after the Holocaust in Europe ended. So we're much better off with some kind of sovereignty, some kind of independence, some kind of an ability to make our own destiny than to insist on having the whole thing. So they said yes, but the Arab leadership rejected it completely, and which means that the Partition Plan basically equals nothing. Okay, it's like any type of a proposal that you make, and then the other side rejects it. That's the status of the Partition Plan after the Arab leadership rejected it. So the idea was the creation of an independent Arab and Jewish state. So I'll remind you that the Arab population of the mandate for Palestine was already given 77%, although under a foreign regime, which is still now the Hashemite tribe. But now they want to carve out another part of the Arab population, and you see it here in the brownish areas here. This was meant to be a part of the Arab state. This was meant to be a part of the Jewish state. Everything that is in white here. And if you see here, this is Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was meant to become some kind of a internationally controlled city. Okay, this was meant to be a part of the Partition Plan. Again, it was rejected. And what happened after that, the Israeli leadership, they understand that the British mandate is about to end. The British are about to leave the country, and they've declared independence while knowing that the Arab military forces are about to invade what was the remaining part of the British mandate. I argue that when Ben Gurion stood in Tel Aviv and declared independence over the entire territory. I mean, you didn't see Ben Gurion saying, well, I'm declaring sovereignty over Tel Aviv and Afula and the Kinneret and Elat. No, he said, I'm declaring independence. And I think this is something that we often forget. And the armies invaded the newly established Israel right at that moment in time. So we had basically 7 military forces, which included the local Arab troops, the Egyptian army, the enormous Egyptian army, the Jordanian army, which was basically the pet project of the British mandate, which, by the way, what made it so strong. Iraq, most people don't know that Iraq also sent troops and supplies. Of course, Lebanon, Syria, and then Saudi Arabia also participated somewhat. All right, so let's go on to discuss the green line. So what is this green line that we keep on hearing about? Okay, so the green line is basically where the armies stood when all the parties decided to stop fighting for the moment. Okay, so this is something that overwhelms me, because this is such a random line. Just imagine, it's such a random line. They fought and fought and fought for so many months, and then at a certain moment in time, the Arab army just says, all right, we're just gonna, call it we want to break from the war. And this was just the random line of where everyone kind of stopped fighting. And so what was created, if you look at this, is basically, this is the green line, right? This is the green line. Also here in Gaza, the Egyptians also succeeded a little bit in conquering this a strip here along the coast, which we now call the Gaza Strip. So let's talk about the legal status of this green line, okay? So first of all, Jordan was the only country to actually annex. They annexed the territory that was occupied, of course, that included the old city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was divided into 2 parts. And no one in the international community ever recognized this annexation. No one, by the way, by the British, again, this was their pet project, and Pakistan. Even the Arab League, even the Arab countries, even the other countries that participated in the war with Jordan, like Egypt and Syria and Lebanon, none of them actually accepted this annexation as legal. Another thing that is interesting to know about the Green Line is that all of the Arab countries insisted that this would become an armistice line, not a border. They insisted that this line becomes a line with absolutely no prejudice regarding the claims and the legal status of the territory. This is something that actually the Arabs insisted on. And so if you look at the ceasefire agreements, each and every ceasefire agreement has that clause that says this is nothing more than a ceasefire line and will have no legal ramifications whatsoever. It's also important to say that the Palestinians, or what was later became known as the Palestinians, the local Arab communities, were not a part of the discussions, and they were not referred to by anyone. They were not included in the ceasefire agreements of either of the ceasefire agreements. And another thing that is important to know, that in 1988, of course, 1967, Israel takes it back, but 1988, King Hussein officially announces some kind of a waiver of claims of these territories. Of course, he no longer had them, and then he was trying to say that he was doing that for the sake of the Palestinian Arabs. Okay, let's run through this very fast. I mean, I don't know how many of you are law students or lawyers at all, but just to get acquainted with the UN Security Council Resolution 242, which was taken right after 1967. 1967 was a war of aggression. The Arab armies again invaded Israel from the north, the south, and the east. The war resulted in a complete victory for Israel, which shocked the world. The next thing that happened was that Egypt was the one who ran to the Security Council to say, you know, help us and save us from what just happened. And the Security Council adopts a resolution. Again, this was Chapter 6 and not Chapter 7, so it's not legally binding, but still. This is the important part: withdrawal from all territories, withdrawal from territories. We see there's documentation of the debate that specifically said that they debated whether to say all territories or just say from territories. And when we see the final version of the resolution, it says from territories. So we know for sure that there was no intention of saying all territories. Second thing that people neglect to discuss is termination of all claims. So basically, even if you want Israel to withdraw from territories, you must ensure that the other side promises to terminate all claims. And this is something people rarely discusses. Again, Palestinian Arabs were not mentioned at all in 242. And refugees, again, we see from the documentation that the resolution meant to discuss all refugees and rejected a reference specifically to any one-sided refugee issue. All right, the Oslo Accords. Oslo Accords it was a series of accords between the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and of course Israel. The PLO was actually established in 1964, so 3 years before the 6 Day War. So if you look at the PLO charter, I just want to mention it in a word. So the PLO charter, this was done when the PLO was sitting here, okay, here in the West Bank, that Jordan called this the West Bank of the Jordan River, when they occupied it and kept it for 19 years, of course, illegally. And so the Palestinians are sitting here, the PLO is sitting here, and they're talking about freeing Palestine. So if they're talking about freeing Palestine while sitting in what's today referred to as the West Bank, so what exactly are they talking about? Well, of course, they're talking about the rest of the territory, which was then, of course, Israel. So a few things that are important to know: an interim agreement, meaning that this was meant to be temporary until a permanent status negotiation will finally decide on some on the permanent status of the territories and of course the other issues. The Accords established the Palestinian Authority. It didn't exist before. What gave it life was the Oslo Accords. They established the PA as an interim autonomous self-government, and of course determined the division of territory A, B, and C. Now I notice the fact that I don't have a map of that, but just so you know, A means that the Palestinians, the PA, has full control of the territory. B means that the Palestinians have civil control and Israel has security control. And C means that Israel has full control. This was agreed upon between Israel and the PLO in the Oslo Accords. So today, when people say settlements, they actually refer to every Jewish person alive. Okay, there are a few dead ones in Area A, but every living Jew is living in Area C. Okay, and so just so you know what we're talking about. So basically, the PA has full autonomous control over the Palestinian lives in every issue but borders. I mean, this was, the PA cannot control their own border crossing. I mean, international airports or access by sea. And of course, they're not allowed to have their own army. But in every aspect of everyday life, education, welfare, economy, you name it, the Palestinian Authority is autonomous and controls their own issues. Of course, I'm not discussing Hamas now. This is for a whole different lecture. So issues that were deliberately and very explicitly left to negotiate in a permanent status negotiations are these four things. Jerusalem, the status of Jerusalem was not discussed in the Oslo Accords, was left to be discussed in the permanent negotiations. Jewish communities, meaning that both parties, PLO and Israel, agreed and were fully aware of the fact that there were Jewish communities in Area A and Area C, and this issue was meant to be resolved in final status negotiations. A third thing was Palestinian refugees and the determination of final borders will also be resolved in final status negotiation. So current status of the Accords. Well, this was made before Mahmoud Abbas has just now recently, a couple of days ago, again declared that he's revoking the Oslo Accords. I don't know. I mean, it's still on the ground. Seems like it's valid, but basically, we still consider the Accords valid. The interim agreements were aimed to continue for only 5 years, and a permanent agreement was meant to be achieved within 5 years. Unfortunately, this was not done. And it's important to know that many international forces, including the EU and the US, actually witnessed and endorsed the Oslo Accords. Okay. I just want to go over a few important things with you. So first, a few, let's say, key principles of international law. So first, let's talk about the right to self-determination. This is, of course, a well-established right in modern international law. However, the scope and the legal consequences still remain unclear until this day. So basically, does self-determination equals independence and sovereignty? Well, the answer is absolutely not. I mean, yes, it can. And I'll give you an example. If you look at any country in the world, even look at Israel, okay? We have so many minority groups in Israel, like we have in every other country, basically. So we have, the Israeli Arabs. Within the Israeli Arabs, we have Christians and Muslims, and then we have Druze, Cherkesim, even Ethiopian Jews, Haredi Jews, you name it. So each and every group have the right of self-determination according to international law. But does that mean that they now have the right to their own independent and sovereign state? And does that mean that they have that right in a predetermined territory? Of course not. Just imagine the instability, the chaos, the bloodshed that would likely erupt all over the world if we were to make that rule. Okay, just imagine, just think about the United States, for example. Every single minority, if we had said that self-determination equals independence and sovereignty, just imagine the bloodshed and the chaos. Okay, so of course the answer is no. And people always try to argue that the Palestinians have a right to self-determination. Therefore, they must have their independent state in the 1967 borders. So let's try to answer that. First of all, yes. Palestinians have the right to self-determination. I'm not arguing with that, 100%. They enjoy the right to self-determination. Does that mean that they, according to international law, must have a state in their predetermined territory that is based on armistice lines that did not revolve around them at all? And does that mean that they can do that without negotiation for a peace agreement? I think the answer should be 100% no. Uris Possidetis Juris is also something very interesting, and this is a principle in international law that was used many times in the 19th century, also afterwards in the 20th century, in Africa, in Eastern Europe, in South America, okay? And the point of this was to maintain stability and certainty, even at the expense of other rights or other interests, okay? And it's very simple, okay? If, let's say, there's a decolonizing process of a certain country, okay? Then the group that declares independence basically inherits the lines or the borders of the previous empire, or the previous country, or the previous colony. Okay, so if we look at the mandate for Palestine, so once the British left and Israel has declared independence, then using Uti Possidetis Juris, you can certainly argue that Israel then inherited the boundaries of the British mandate for Palestine, which of course, as we can see, includes the entire territory and not the green line borders. And so we see that happen. I mean, we see what this Possidetis Juris is discussed in so many cases, including in Yugoslavia in the process of arbitration. And this usually takes precedence to many other legal principles. And the last thing I want to discuss with you before we open to question is people say that because Israel has conquered or occupied the territory, then it means that it cannot enjoy, let's say, the fruit of an illegitimate act. So, not like it says here, not to accept conquest as a legitimate act to acquire territory. So there are a few exceptions to that law, to that rule, okay? First one is distinction between an aggressive conquest and a defensive conquest, okay? If we want to deter countries from attacking other countries in order to acquire territory from them, then when we're talking about a defensive war, that rule does not apply, and that doesn't deter anyone, because either way, you were the victim of an attack. And the second one is taking territory legally held and the taking of territory illegally held. So if we go back to what we discussed about Jordan, so if Israel has taken the territory from Jordan in 1967, which it has conquered in an aggressive war and held illegally for 19 years, then this rule of preferential way to conquest obviously does not apply. And I'm not the only one saying that. We have precedents in international law, including from former president of the ICJ, who made many references to that. And a few other issues that before we wrap up. So first of all, I always wondered about that. I mean, if we say that the very existence of a Jewish home, of a Jewish child, of a Jewish town, in a what would possibly be a future Palestinian state is an international war crime or a crime against humanity, the very existence of a village or the very existence of a house. So aren't we really advocating for a Jewish free zone, for a human rights zone? I find that a bit odd when you discuss human rights and then you use that as an argument, okay? As we said before, we should always distinguish between what we think should be done, okay? And I think, again, as I said in the beginning, I might have an opinion about what we should do, when we should do it, how we should do it. We should take into account, possible violence or possible international ramification, et cetera, et cetera. But that does not mean that when we're making the legal analysis, when we're having a legal discussion, we shouldn't stick to the facts and to the issues of international law. So for example, Israel has a valid legal right, a positive, legitimate legal rights to the territory, and yet Israel can decide, or Israel and the Palestinians can negotiate something fair between them, whatever it will be, whatever your opinion about it might be, and that is a separate issue from the legal issue. All right. So I think we're going to wrap up here. Elan, you want to free this presentation so we can go to questions, if we have any?
Yes. So first of all, Yifa, thank you so much for this amazing lecture. A lot of information that I'm sure we all learn new things. And we also have questions coming in both from Facebook and from here. If anyone has questions, just please write them in the chat so we can ask. The first question is, if it sounds like Israel does have a case, so how come so many people around the world speak up against Israel all the time and make it seem like Israel doesn't have any case at all?
Well, I think we can definitely blame ourselves for that, because we weren't very active in making this conversation and making the argument for ourselves. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And I don't want to go into history, but I think at the end of the day, there's very few of us that has actually taken the time to really study these issues and understand, really honestly understand the legal case. I think, many people now just, they understand it as an axiom, if not a fact, that Israel is illegally occupying the territory, even though they don't even know that you can't really use a legal term that doesn't exist, right? Like illegal occupation doesn't even exist. So I think, we need, this lecture here, or many other lectures that I'm doing. I mean, doing it in Zoom is a bit challenging, I have to say, because I feel like I'm talking to myself. But, I do these type of things a lot. It's not just me. It's a group of lawyers that find this very important. And the more that we can spread the message and spread the word and talk about it, the more people will know about it. It's not be a battle at this point.
Awesome, thank you. And then the next question is, how do you suggest to respond to people who claim Israel ethnically cleansed the Palestinians in 1948?
How do you what? Sorry?
How do we respond to people or students who claim that Israel ethnically cleansed the Palestinians in 1948 during the establishment of the state?
Well, ethnic cleansing, I think, is a very creative argument. Well, first of all, I think the easiest thing to do is show numbers. I mean, if you look at the Arab population before the war and the Arab population after the war, it doesn't really justify. I mean, there isn't really a change that shows any ethnic cleansing. It's actually it's a bit funny. But the second thing, again, there's so much information about this. I mean, people are not aware of the fact that in the vast majority of cases, it was the Arab leadership who encouraged the local Arabs to leave their homes. And they made promises to the local Arab population that it will only take them a few days, and they will wipe up this new Israel off the map, and then they can turn to their homes. It was actually the Arabs who encouraged the local population to leave, and it's very important to learn that. And the third thing, again, just look at the numbers. I mean, if you look at the statistics, even in today's world, if you look at the statistics of the Palestinian population, and you look at the average age of death, I'm sure there's a more elegant way to put it, but average age of death, okay? So in Israel, I think it's like 81 for women, 79 for men, I don't know, something like that. So with the Palestinian population, it's more or less the same. If you look at the percentage of mortality within babies, then it's more or less like it is in the Western world, not so much how it is in the other Arab countries. So the data or the facts don't support these type of allegations. So, always go back to the numbers. If you want, I can send you a few figures or books or articles that you can read about all these different figures. I think it's really eye-opening to some people.
Awesome, thank you very much. And we have actually many questions coming in. So the next one would be, right now there are many talks about annexation. And if Israel has a sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, who are we actually annexing the territory from? From ourselves, or from who are we annexing the territory from?
Well, that's a very good question. First of all, I want to say something about the terminology annexation. Annexation is it means to take something that is not yours and you take it and you annex it. So if we believe that Israel has valid legal claims to the territory, then we're not annexing anything. You know, we're applying Israeli law to the territories over which we believe that we have valid legal claims. So first of all, whenever you discuss, you know, these issues, make sure that you don't use that terminology of annexation if that's not what you believe, because you're basically shooting your argument in the leg by saying annexation, okay? And second thing, whoever asked that question, I think it's a good question, because I think, again, the Israeli government hasn't made it up its mind enough. I mean, there isn't enough of messaging that to explain. So if you look at what the Attorney General has written in favor of the ICC, of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, the Attorney General is calling this sovereignty in abeyance, which, you know, a lot of us thought it was odd. I mean, we understand the strategy behind it, but we thought it was odd because sovereignty in abeyance means that you're not sovereign now. But so who is sovereign? I mean, yes, this is a military controlled territory, right? But who's the military? It's the IDF. Who controls the IDF? It's the Israeli Minister of Defense. Who is the Minister of Defense? It's part of the Israeli government. Who's the Israeli government? That's the sovereign. So it's this game that we're playing with ourselves in order to, I think, in a way, to avoid international criticism, or we wanted to avoid international criticism for 50 some years, and we, you know, we're so confused ourselves, so it's very hard for other people to, you know, to understand.
Outstanding. The next question would be, one second, there are many. So the next question would be, so Israel is talking about a possible annexation or taking over the territory or returning the territory this July. What sort of response you anticipate that Israel will hear? Let it be from the Palestinians, or let it be from the Europeans, or anyone else, or Arab states?
Well, I think I don't know. I mean, I'm not a prophet and I don't know. There are a few things that I want to tell you. First, you know, we've been talking about this for a few months, and I think a lot of the prices in the international arena we've already paid. And so, you know, in a sense, it might be too bad, you know, to pay the prices, but not to, you know, not to get what you actually was set out to do. So that's one thing. The second thing I want to tell you about the Europeans, there's actually been an article I'll be happy to share with everyone today about EU's hypocrisy, takes territory while blasting Israeli annexation. So I think it's fascinating because it goes into all of the examples of how France is holding, you know, their own islands in different places of in the world, and Holland and Britain and all these European countries that you now see leading the charge against Israel for this supposed annexation, while, you know, they still keep that territory and they have no plans of actually giving it up. So I think, you know, EU's hypocrisy when it comes to Israel is just mind-blowing to me. It's just mind-blowing to me. And I will send everyone the article if you want. I think it's a fascinating article. What they will do, I think they will scream and yell for a while and threaten us for a while, but maybe I think that would probably be it. I mean, if you look in Europe, they have enough on their plates. I don't think this is an actual issue, but I don't know.
Outstanding. And the next question, we'll take it from Facebook. So we have a question, and it's the following. According to international law, or your interpretation of it, do those living in Yeshuvim communities in the West Bank have the same legal right to their Arab Palestinians neighbors?
Do they have the same legal rights? Look, I mean, the Palestinians living, I mean, it depends on who you mean by that and what kind of rights you mean by that. So if you are an Arab living in Ramallah, for example, okay, so you are a resident of the Palestinian Authority. So you have your own parliament and your own government and your own leadership that really dictates 99% of what matters in life. So, you know, there's the Palestinian Ministry of Education, and they, you know, prepare their own curriculum. They have their own schools, their own teachers. They have their own incitement there, and their own encouragement of terrorism and martyrism. But that's a different issue. So, I mean, they are in control of that. So, for example, Israel doesn't like, obviously, the fact that there is such an encouragement of young kids to go and murder Jews and Israelis. But we can't change that because the Palestinians are completely autonomous in that aspect, including with economy. I mean, the Palestinians, for example, choose to pay billions of dollars as salaries or stipends to terrorists and their families. And Israel obviously don't like it, but there's nothing we can do about it. So they have their own garbage, you know, like everything that the municipalities are Palestinians, everything that you can think of. And there are two things that they don't have, okay? One is, like I said in the beginning, is an army. But an army, I think, is a collective right and not an individual right. It's not a human right to have an army, okay? And the second thing is control over their own borders. As I said, there is no international airport and there is no access by sea. So, I mean, we can say that it's uncomfortable, but if you want to tell me that this is the difference between the Israeli and the Palestinians, then I would laugh at your face, because I think I mean, first of all, there are reasons because of the circumstances. Second of all, it's just ridiculous. So I think, just to summarize, I think the Palestinians should have issues with the way they live their lives. I mean, their leadership is corrupt. It's encouraging of violence and corruption and theft, and there is no human rights. A few months ago, there was another demonstration by teachers for their salaries or conditions, and these teachers were imprisoned by the PA for even opening their mouth to speak. So for sure, there should be an outrage between the Palestinians about the way that their lives are being run by the government. But it's not the Israeli government, my friend. It's their own government.
Thank you very much. And then another question from Facebook, how any future Israeli move can impact the Oslo Accords?
That's a good question. Look, I don't know. I mean, what people don't realize is that the Oslo Accords are not just about, a peace between Israel and Palestinians, and it's not just about preventing terrorism, and it's not just about preventing Israel from doing what it wants. The Oslo Accords regulate the day-to-day life of security cooperations and taxes and collection of taxes, and there are a million things that help kind of regulate everyday life between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And so I think it's Mahmoud Abbas might feel cornered or might feel it's smart or wise from a political point of view to declare the Oslo Accords null and void. But to be perfectly honest with you, my view is that if the Oslo Accords are really canceled, then Mahmoud Abbas will be hung from a tree in the very next day. He knows that the very existence of the Palestinian Authority, that is in many respects thanks to the agreements he has with Israel, including the security cooperation, is what keeps him alive. Because if you remember what happened in Gaza in 2007, the Hamas took over and threw the PLO people off the rooftops. And so if you ask my personal humble opinion, I would say that it's not going to be over so fast. And there are, the ramifications of canceling the accord are so vast And so I don't know. I mean, I'll go back to just saying I don't know, but just something to think about. It's not so simple.
Okay, thank you. And then we'll take a few more questions before we'll be done. The next question would be on June 10th, the Israeli Supreme Court ruled that the law that the Israeli parliament did in order to legalize different areas in which Israelis live and territories Israelis live, it's not constitutional or it's not legal. So the Supreme Court overturned the Israeli parliament decision. Can you tell us a little bit about the ruling of the Supreme Court?
Yes. Okay. So when the state of Israel has this very strict rule that if there is a private land or any type of even the smallest suspicion that this is a private land, a private Arab or private Palestinian land, then it's illegal to build on it in the territories. And so, there were many attempts were done to try to mark and remark the areas where they thought, this might be private land, even though no one has stood up and said, this is my land. Because in cases when someone stood and said, this was my land or my father, my grandfather's land, and there was even the smallest doubt, usually he was given the land or the houses, the Jewish houses or communities were destroyed by the IDF. The regulation law referred to very specific, very few cases where it was communities or parts of communities were built on land that the state of Israel thought to be public land, and then doubts were raised later after many years that maybe we're talking about a private land. Again, no one knows, no one stood up and said this is my land, no one proved that this is his land or anything, but there are always attempts to avoid any type of doubt by the Israeli government. So the Israeli government thought to legislate this regulation law that says that in these very specific cases, and only when good faith can be proven, meaning that this was done innocently, and in these cases, if you can compensate the owner of the land 125% worth of what the land is worth today, then you can keep that neighborhood or not destroy that neighborhood or that house or that part of the community. And the Supreme Court, I have to tell you, I don't understand it. I mean, I know that it's a sensitive issue, and I understand that we're trying to be as careful as we possibly can, and not create a situation where we, this might create a problem for Israel. But I don't get it. I don't get this ruling, because I'll give you an example. There is a rule in Israel. Also, I checked in the United States and other countries as well. I mean, if such a situation occurs, then, I mean, just imagine in Tel Aviv, okay? Just imagine that a huge office building was built in Tel Aviv, and then 20 years later, someone comes and says, this is mine. Oops, you just built this huge building on my territory. There's no way that the court would order you to demolish that building. And it doesn't happen that way anywhere in the world. And so this arrangement of reimbursing or compensating the owner 125% is even more generous than how it is in most places. So anyway, the Supreme Court had said that this is not enough, that it's still an infringement on the possibility that there is an owner, and et cetera, et cetera. So he said this law is unconstitutional. This is the explanation in a nutshell, if you can believe that this is a nutshell. But yeah, I don't necessarily get it.
Thank you so much. Then another question would be, are there any other nonprofits or NGOs that you're actually combating during your work that actually make your work more challenging, or try to teach everything different than from what you're teaching. Like if you can tell us a little bit about that world between the nonprofits themselves that try to push their own narratives.
Yes. I'll give you another example. We in November we filed together with Richard Heideman's law firm in DC. We filed a very big lawsuit together with the KKL as plaintiffs against the fiscal sponsor of the BNC. The BNC is the BDS National Committee. This is a group that have established, created, invented the BDS movement. Although people believe that this is a grassroots movement, it's not. It was orchestrated. It was planned beautifully by this group of people, controlled by 5 designated terrorist organizations, meaning Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, the PFLP, etc. So the terrorist organization have established the BDS movement, making everyone think that it's a grassroots movement that is meant to deal with human rights. So we have filed this lawsuit in Washington, D.C. to say that they're funding terrorism. And we've linked them, we showed evidence to link them to the great marches of return on the Gaza fence and the fires and the bombs and the rockets. So you see all these NGOs, right? The fiscal sponsor that we sued is an organization that has 329 members in the United States alone. Organizations that are affiliated with the BNC, 329, okay, in the United States alone. And so all these organizations try to stand up for the BNC and say and come out against us and our lawsuit. Now, if you look, we've watched webinars and newsletters, and we watched what they published on their website. They never negated the actual claim. They never said, "Oh my God, we're not associated with Hamas. Oh my God, we never would have had anything to do with people firing rockets or threatening to murder Jews or anything like that." They never said that. With all of their communications, all they've said was that we're trying to silence them, is that, this is some kind of a conspiracy, whatever. But they've never said that they oppose the funding of terrorism or any type of violence, which I think is kind of demonstrates who we're dealing with. I mean, it's either people that know exactly, what they are doing and who they are affiliated with, or it's people that have been so blinded by the fact that this has become like, the place to be. If you want to be popular on college campus, then you want to be anti-Israel. And if you want to be popular within the academics or international law experts, or if you, even the prosecutor of the ICC, if she wants to be popular, then she will launch an investigation into Israel. And so they don't take the time to bother. They don't bother to learn the arguments and the law and the history well enough to have their own opinion. So I think these are mainly the two groups, Ilan, if you ask my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then we'll take last 2 questions. We know it's already 10 p.m. in Israel, so the last 2 questions are the following. I'll ask both of them combined. The first one is that we know that the United States right now just decided to withdraw some funding or withhold from the ICC and spoke very strongly against the ICC. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And the second and the last question would be, in the Students Supporting Israel, we have many, many students who do go to law school after they finish with their undergrad. How can they help? Mm-hmm. How can they be involved? So the following 2, and that should do it.
All right, great. So I love the last one. I'll get to that. So I'll start with the first one. Look, I mean, I personally, I really enjoyed Pompeo's statement. I don't know about you guys. And here's the situation, okay? Here comes the prosecutor in the ICC. By the way, she was an attorney general in, what was it, in the Congos, where they had like, a horrible legal system where they would charge political rivals and stuff like that. But anyway, she comes to the United States of America and tells the United States of America that, you know, the International Criminal Court does not trust the American judicial system enough. They don't believe the American judicial system enough to think that it's not a farce, that there was an actual investigation, that the Americans are actually looking into a possible allegation against them, because this is a condition of the ICC. You cannot. It's called complementarity. If the local judicial system is strong enough and you can show that there was a fair, I don't know, investigation or a trial, then the ICC does not have jurisdiction. So basically, just imagine that. The ICC is talking about the United States, saying, we don't trust you. Your legal system is a farce. We are going to investigate you. We are better than the best, biggest democracy in the world. And so I think the Americans are rightfully pissed off, if you don't mind my French. And they have tried in all kinds of ways to get them to climb down from the tree, but they wouldn't. So I think at the end of the day, what the American government is basically saying is, you know, if you don't want to play nice, so we'll stop playing nice. But what happened last time when John Bolton was still the National Security Advisor, and he made a similar speech, it wasn't as harsh, and it didn't include Israel, but he made a similar speech about sanctions. It took the ICC only a few days to come back with the decision to say that, quote unquote, for the interest of justice, they will shut down the investigation. So, you know, I have good reasons to be optimistic about the fact that maybe this time they will come back and say, for the interest of justice, we are shutting down the investigation, or maybe for the interest of justice, we actually came to the conclusion that even though there is no Palestinian state, and we say that there is no Palestinian state, then we'll treat it like there is no Palestinian state. So that's about the ICC. Basically, I think, I don't know if you guys have followed it, but Pompeo is saying he's going to revoke visas from ICC staff, family members. They're talking about Visa, American Express, different things. I mean, this will be interesting. Now, when it comes to helping us or helping others, we have a group of lawyers. Law students can also be included. We have our newsletter, and we often ask questions. We look for volunteers. There are a lot of examples of things that you can do. We can teach you to make a similar presentation to your friends or your colleagues or your fellow students. There are also other presentations that we give out and we teach, like the one about IRA, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, that I think people need to get familiarized with. So email us, join the newsletter, ask how you can help, ask if you can volunteer, ask if you can help us establish our budget, of course, as well as also an issue, and the more the merrier.
Amazing. Yifa, first of all, thank you so much. It was very enlightening, and we learned a lot. I do think that if every student in the United States would be with your passion and with your knowledge and college campuses, our situation would be much better and we'll be much stronger. So we really enjoyed listening to you. If anyone wants to, is it okay to share your email with people that's curious and for any further?
Yes, please. The email, the website, everything. And if you want any of the materials that I mentioned, any of the articles, the presentation, the legal analysis, anything that I've said, and you want, just contact me.
Outstanding. So we'll make sure that we forward your information. And with that note, we want to thank you. We do want to remind everyone that tonight we have another webinar hosted by the students at Columbia and by the president of Freedom about the legal status of the Temple Mount. So we're going to be sticking to the legal statuses and what's allowed, what's not. So join us tonight. And Yifa, thank you so much for teaching us. We appreciate it. Good night. Goodbye.